Okay, it's 12:02. We are going to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 4th edition of FACC NE's Leader Series. I'm Ludivine Wolksik, the Executive Director of FACC NE, the French-American Chamber of Commerce of New England. Today's session is organized in partnership with FRAMCO, the French-American Business Council of West Florida, and with the support of the FACC New York and AmCham France. FACC NE is one of the leading chapters of the French-American Chamber of Commerce, which focuses on life sciences. And back in 2012, we decided to launch a group called FABS, which is a group of experts in healthcare, biotech, medical devices, digital health, in order to facilitate networking and exchange within the French-American business community in the Boston area. We also wanted to support French startups and small biotech companies to launch and grow their business in the United States. You can learn more about the FABs by visiting our website at faccne.org. Today, we are delighted to have Valerie Philippon, one of the founding members of the FABs group, to have accepted to lead the conversation with Professor Christian Brechot. Valerie is based in Boston, and she's currently the head of global publications at Takeda. She has over 20 years of experience in research, development, program management, and medical affairs. She received her PhD in microbiology from the University Denis Diderot in Paris, France, and she moved to Boston in 1994 to complete a postdoc at Harvard School of Public Health. She has since held a variety of medical affairs and scientific communication roles with increasing responsibilities, successively at Idenix, Vertex, Avio, Oncology, Cubis Pharmaceutical, Shire, and now Takeda. Valerie is a founding member of the FABs, but also the founding member of Boston Café des Sciences, a monthly scientific gathering of Francophone scientific community in Massachusetts. She's also a member of the New England chapter of the French Trade Advisors, Conseiller du Commerce Extérieur de la France, Section Nouvelle-Angleterre, and she is also the current chair of the International Society for Medical Publications Professionals Board of Trustees, the ISNPP. With no further ado, I will now turn it to Valerie to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludivine. It's a great pleasure and honor to moderate today's discussion and to represent the FABs, the Boston French Biotech Springboard. So as a quick disclosure, the view I express today are my own, and I'm not representing any of my past or current employers. So let's jump in. MD, PhD, hepatologist and virologist, Professor Brechot had been the head of INSERM, l'Institut National de la Santé et de la Recherche Médicale, the French NIH, served as the Vice President of Medical and Scientific Affairs at Institut Mérieux, and is a former president of the prestigious Pasteur Institute. He is currently part-time Senior Associate Dean for Research in Global Affairs at the University of South Florida Health Morsani College of Medicine, Associate Vice President for International Partnership and Innovation, and Professor in the Division of Infectious Disease. He is also the President of the Global Virus Network, a network of 48 research centers worldwide, headquartered in Baltimore, and is the president of FRAMCO, the French-American Chamber of Commerce of West Florida. It's a pleasure to discuss with you today, Professor Brechot. I'd just like to let the audience know that we will actually open the floor to questions at the end of the discussion. So we'll save 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So please, use the chat and post your question first before the end. So let's dive into our first topic. So you have a very rich experience of French and European research, as well as American academic models and relationships between industry, academia, not-for-profit organization on those two continents. So maybe we can start in the pre-COVID era. What was the model of collaboration pertaining to virus detection, therapy development, vaccine development, and their rollout?
Well, thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you also, Ludivine, for this invitation. And thank you, Charles, for what you are doing for FRAMCO. It's really a great pleasure to contribute to this session. And obviously, this is a very interesting topic. And yes, it's always we are going during the conversation to explain some of the points we have to improve in the future. But it's always important, as you said, to start in the pre-COVID and to witness that it's strange, but we did make a lot of progress in public health after, obviously, the HIV pandemics, which really has been a kind of a wake-up call worldwide for the global health, and then the Ebola crisis. And that really led to a number of organizations, such as the Gavi for the vaccine with the Gates Foundation, for the WHO to create the International Health Regulation, which have been very useful, GOARN, which is a network with Global Outbreak Alert and Research Network, and others. And also, after Ebola, in 2017, the creation of the so-called CP, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, which is really the first coalition which really merged academics, industrial partners, governments, large foundations. And the idea was to be prepared, to be better prepared, to have stocks of vaccines available. And as we will discuss during the next minutes, obviously, they didn't pick up the good virus because we didn't know about the coronavirus when they decided to prepare the stocks. But this coalition has been very efficient when COVID-19 emerged to really move for the vaccine preparation. So again, we did have a number of organizations, and the reason why it's interesting to start with this is that when thinking of the future, we really need also to build on what had been available, but also to analyze what went wrong, and this is what we are going to discuss.
Yeah, you talk about the future. So can we indeed analyze briefly the US and European responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe get your opinion on the lesson learned, and in particular, maybe the main similarity and differences, that exist during, around those academic, industry, philanthropic foundation, government partnership, because as we saw, the government played a big role in this pandemic as well. So between the US centric and European model.
Yes, that's, you see, I don't know who said that, but that was, we were lacking of imagination. We were lacking of scenario, you see, where we would really predict what might happen, not only at the from the medical point of view, but really considering the whole organization of the world if a viral pandemics were to happen. But when it happened, for me, the main difference between the US and the EU is that the US, although I'm not going to take any political stance on this, to be clear, but it is true that the US reacted as in the context of a war. And that's really the merit of the Warp Speed initiative for the vaccine. And that has been huge, and with the BARDA, and it was really going fast, going beyond. When the president of the US invites at the White House the heads of the global pharma and also some small biotechs, that's something which on a retrospective basis may seem obvious, but which was not obvious at that time. And at the same time, unfortunately, although many good things are coming from the European Union just reacted, if I may speak like this, as a business as usual. I mean, we need to do something. We are going to issue some calls, some bids for collaboration with the pharma, and it really didn't go at the same pace. And then along the same problem, the US, in my view, have really used, for example, the Defense Protection Act to really act on the ventilators, on the mask. The administration, so of Trump administration, initiated this. The Biden administration has made a huge effort on logistics, implying the army. It's really a wartime. And the question is, do we understand that it's a wartime? And that has been a main difference between the US and the EU, I believe.
And what would you attribute that to? Is it like a lack of vision from the European leadership? Was it like the weight of the bureaucracy, maybe, that you know, weigh a little bit on the European shoulder that we may not have as much in the US?
Yeah, I would say both. A lack of vision, I have to say. Again, you see, it's very sensitive on a political basis, and we have to be careful. But yeah, I would say a lack of vision and a solid bureaucracy. Yeah.
That the Americans were able to go with that, certainly. So let's look at what's going on now. So what's the current situation, in particular with respect to the circulating variants? What do you think are the best way to mitigate the spread of the variants that we became familiar with now, the alpha, beta, delta, as we hear from their new denomination? So how do we, you know, control those, as well as the emergence of new variants, you know, as obviously the pandemic is not yet over around the world?
Yeah, that's really obviously the major concern. You see, first, it's normal for a virus to generate variants. So it's not surprising. Coronaviruses generally show less variability than other viruses, such as, for example, influenza. And this holds true for the beta coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, the agent of Covid-19. However, and that's something surprising that we have learned, we did see generation of variants which took over. So as you said, I mean, now we have a new denomination. I believe it's good because to have a labeling from the countries was a little bit weird. So we have the alpha, which is really the one from the UK, beta from South Africa, gamma, so-called from Brazil, delta is the famous Indian, epsilon from California, and so on. So the main points are exactly which are the impacts. You see, a virus will constantly generate many variants, but most of them, we will never see them. We only see those which have a specific advantage over the other ones. So specific advantage for what? We have to discuss contagiousness, severity of the disease, and resistance to the vaccines, and possibly treatment. So contagiosity, it is clear, and that's really a challenge, and especially now for the Delta variant, that there has been an increase in contagiousness. You see, in fact, it's interesting to remember that why did China contain so well COVID-19? Well, because they had drastic measures that you can only have in a country like China, but also because the first virus, the so-called Wuhan strain, was not so infectious. And then when it was transmitted to Europe and then to the world, there was the famous D614G mutation. Many people forgot about this, but this is where the virus really increased contagiousness and then all over the world. And this strain became the reference strain. Then came the so-called UK alpha in October, and then the so-called Brazil, South Africa, and now Indian Delta. Delta variant, unfortunately, again, shows a very significant increased contagiousness as against the alpha, the UK, which itself was also showing increased contagiousness over the previous one. So we do have a problem. And the Delta variant is, obviously I will speak of the UK in 1 minute, but the Delta variant is in France, increasing slowly. It is in the US now. And because it is much more contagious, well, I hope I'm wrong, but unless we have a complete vaccine protection, it will disseminate. Now, does it increase severity? Well, that's another story. Most of the virus, when they evolve, this is very simplistic, but if you think like a virus, you want to be more contagious, but you don't want to kill your host, you see? And you don't want to increase so much severity. So in fact, when we heard about some of these variants being inducing more severe disease, we have a mix between epidemiology, you see, and intrinsic properties of the variant. And this has been, for example, when a few weeks ago we were talking about the so-called Brazilian, the gamma variant being more severe in young people, and so on. Well, this did not really hold true, you see. That was really mostly explained by epidemiological factors. And for the Delta variant, there is no evidence so far. We always have to be very humble and careful, but there is no evidence so far for increased severity. And the third point is obviously, do they resist to vaccines? And then the very good news is that, and we will come back to the vaccine also in the next section, but it's important to emphasize that for the RNA vaccine, which had been the huge success, unexpected, huge success, landmark success, which will remain in the history of medicine, of human medicine. Well, these vaccines are efficient against these variants, and in particular against the Delta variant. It also holds true for the adeno virus-based vaccine, although for the AstraZeneca, the efficacy on the Delta variant is less. But you see, it's important to emphasize that most of the tests are based on in vitro testing, where you test the neutralization. But what are we asking to a vaccine? We are asking to prevent circulation of the virus, of course, but above all, we want to prevent severe disease. We want to prevent hospitals, and we want to prevent, obviously, death. And in this respect, what is going on in the UK is very informative. Negative point. This country was an example of successful vaccination, relaxation of the containment. Everything is nice, as always, for giving lessons to the rest of Europe, you see? And then there is this epidemiology. Now the Delta variants increase and increase and increase, and Boris Johnson, and he's perfectly right, because I very much admire what has been done in the UK for vaccine, says, okay, we have to delay the relaxation of the containment. So why? Well, it shows that even when you vaccinate up to 70% of the population, it's not enough. It's not enough. And the problem they have is that many of the people in the UK have not been vaccinated with 2 doses. They have been vaccinated with 1 dose. So so it doesn't mean that the vaccine is not efficient on the Delta variant. It means that you have to vaccinate and vaccinate and vaccinate, and also that even if you vaccinate many of the relatively old people, if the young people are there and if you have a high circulation of the virus. Now, having said that, I was in contact with a clinician in London yesterday. The disease is overall much milder than previously. And so far, the rate of death is much lower. So in other words, what we are learning from the UK is that this virus is highly contagious, doesn't induce a more severe disease, is relatively sensitive and fully sensitive depending on the vaccine, on these vaccines. However, if you do not have a full vaccination program, you are not in a very good shape. So that's really what we learned about the variant so far, at least.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify your point, when you say that the disease induced with the Delta variant may be less severe, is because like people are partially vaccinated mostly then, even though they didn't get their second dose. I think we learned it's probably around like 50 to 60% protection, right? After a couple of weeks after the first dose. So that will actually provide not complete immune response, and you do get sick, but if it's, as you said, a much milder disease, certainly a big win for the hospital system, the healthcare, and the patient population, the population at large.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we believe. You have a partial protection against. And by the way, I didn't speak about the so-called South African, but briefly, the beta. This variant is the one which is the most resistant to the vaccine. However, again, this vaccine did protect against severe disease, and fortunately, but this is not by chance, this variant is much less contagious, and so far really has not been dominating the scene, unless South Africa.
So there is some evolutionary pressure. You're either more infectious or you are more severe.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, and that's you have exception to this, unfortunately, but that's really the point. You see, absolutely.
So we talk about vaccine efficacy, and obviously it's completely real-world evidence generation now, right? So, what are the key questions related to the vaccine effectiveness, across the globe, and all these amazing data we're generating day after day of infection, of response, immune response, and so on. So, what's your thoughts on vaccine effectiveness and the key questions that's raised for the future of healthcare?
Yeah, you see, well, as I said, but we have to reiterate, because that's part of the success of medicine. What has happened, everybody is telling this, so it becomes a little bit mundane, but what has happened regarding the development of vaccines in 1 year, in less than 1 year actually, has been extraordinary. And I really want to emphasize that what has happened in the US, and it really goes back to your first question, with the wartime and the push for innovation and so on, has been extraordinary. So vaccine efficacy, extremely efficient, 90–95%, you cannot even compare. Efficient not only on the severity, but on the circulation of the virus, and all the data which are coming every day from countries with a large scale of vaccination goes to the same point, to the same direction. You prevent disease in the household. It's effective, and it's great. Breakthrough, of course, a virus is never 100% effective. There had been a paper last week in the New England Journal of Medicine, very detailed analysis, 2 cases out of 400. So it may happen, and I'm sure that in the next weeks and months, we will see breakthrough. For example, at Tampa General Hospital, they did observe breakthrough, and we will have breakthrough, and especially in older people, because the rate of immunization, and this comes as no surprise, is lower in older people than in young people, which makes sense. That's true for all viruses. Now, there is a point which is very important. How do we evaluate the efficacy of vaccine? We evaluate on antibodies. And within antibodies, you have what we call neutralizing antibodies. And that's all very good. It's a very good biomarker or efficacy. But it's not the only one. We all know that you have also, obviously, the cellular immune response. And this cellular immune response, which is key for the duration of the protection, which is key for the protections against the variants which can be generated, we cannot measure on routine testing. So when we say, okay, how many people should be vaccinated to get to the herd immunity? The honest answer is we don't know, because we are not able to measure a part of the important parameter. And I really believe that it's really pledged for biomarkers. And by the way, this provides extremely interesting opportunities for biotechs and large companies, because these biomarkers of efficacy of vaccine, we are just at the beginning. So the challenge are obviously the duration. We don't know. There are many speculations. We don't know. It will depend on the age. It will depend, for example, in immunosuppressed versus immunocompetent people. So it's really something we have to monitor in prospective studies, in cohort. Now, what is very interesting is that it's a multi-parameter question. The environment, and in particular the nutrition, is very important for the efficacy of vaccination. The microbiome, the gut microbiome, is very important for the efficacy of vaccine in general, but for COVID-19 in particular, and this is now well demonstrated. So if we really want to be comprehensive, to really have the whole picture, we will have to analyze a huge number of data. So it's really about big data. We will have to standardize the health electronic records. And so that really points again to the development, and this is what is being attempted and done in certain conditions, to really develop big data analysis, AI, and so on for this analysis. And to close on the vaccine, the G7 has pledged for 1 billion for the low-income countries. This is absolutely necessary. It's not only a moral obligation. If we do not, if you see, it's just like in a house and you would have some rooms burning and you would keep 2 rooms cleared and you would not care for the other ones. Well, at the end of the day, the whole house is going to burn. So obviously, if we want to maintain an economic, the economy, it's about borders, it's about generating new variants. So the WHO tells us that it's not 1 billion that we need. It's about 17 billion, if I'm correct. So we are far from exactly what we are. I'm looking on a note on this, but it's yes, we need 11 billion. Sorry, to get 70% of vaccinates worldwide. This is a question of patents. Patents will be discussed, of course, but this is really for me and for many people not the first thing. The first is produce, export, but locally we have to work on the logistic, and nothing negative in my comment, but a global virus network, we are working with all continents. When you see the reality of vaccination, we have to work on how to distribute these doses. So this is, I don't want to take too much, but this is a huge problem ahead for vaccine. And the fact, for example, to have new vaccines such as Novavax, which has just been announcing very good results with protein-based, it's not the end of the vaccine story. We will need a vaccine which can be distributed very easily, administered in one shot. The cost will be very important, storage condition. So there are many, many developments that we are going to witness. And it will take, I believe, at least 2 years before we can really claim that we have vaccinated the world. So what is the conclusion, the final conclusion on this? Vaccine is very good. Vaccine will never help by itself to solve the pandemics. It's combining precautions, vaccine, diagnostic, rapid diagnostic, we will come to this, and treatment. And that's the only way to cope with the pandemics.
Thank you, Professor Brechot. I'm glad you talked about the G7, sorry, speaking French now. I was just going to ask you actually, because of the commitment they made and the political will to vaccinate the world by the end of 2022. And I think you answered the question, in terms of what seems to be an attainable timeline in your perspective. But yeah, I think we talked quite a bit about vaccine already. So let's talk about diagnostic, since you mentioned that. I think, we had, like, again, very different partnership between US and European Union, but they have both been, successful in putting the vaccine forward, developing it, running it out. Diagnostic, it seemed that the testing development was, more chaotic at first, compared especially with the success we've seen on the vaccines front. But where are we now on diagnostic, and how could we make sure those tests evolve rapidly?
Yeah, that's a very important point. And I have found it very disappointing. You see, I have a personal bias. I have been the vice president of the Institut Mérieux, the largest company of which is BioMérieux, which is a diagnostic company. And I have always been, on a personal basis, very interested in diagnostics. But having said that, huge effort on vaccine, some huge effort to a lesser extent, but also on treatment. But we didn't have these coalitions on diagnostic, exactly as you said. And we have been so slow. And from the past, from the summer 2020, it was clear that it was possible to have salivary-based tests and not this horrible nasopharyngeal test that obviously you cannot repeat on a very highly frequent basis, you see, and especially in schools, but not only in schools, and that you could associate salivary tests to molecular tests very rapid. For example, there is a GVN center in Boston with Dr. Pardis Sabeti, and they had a combination of salivary, so-called LAMP, rapid molecular assay, and CRISPR-Cas-based revelation. And this is, again, a huge opportunity for many companies and so on. Rapid diagnostic is the key, not only now, but in the future, to maintain economy, social, cultural life, and so on, despite a pandemic. We will have new pandemics. This is very likely. There are at least 4 coronaviruses in bats which are ready to go to humans. Doesn't mean it will do. We cannot predict, but there is a risk. When a virus arrives, we may come to this in a minute, but you can react much more swiftly, in a way coordinated. But by definition, you need some time before you generate a new vaccine and new treatment. But if you have implemented the sampling procedures, some testing procedures in restaurants, in theaters, in the enterprise, and in the companies, you maintain the economy and at the border. So yes, that's really something I point as one of the big mistakes that we have made regarding the pandemics.
Globally. And so let's talk about, how those partnerships that include diagnostic company can really get better, right? Like between biotech, the large pharma, the diagnostic company, they're like a best blueprint in terms of interaction. What are the challenges, the opportunity? Is there room and needs for more of a three-way partnership in that sense, on the industry side, and what is the role of government and philanthropy would play on top of that?
Yeah, that's, well, maybe I can take on 2 tiers which are absolutely related, but there is a question of new modes of organizations between academics versus national and international institutions, governments, international organizations. That's one. Second, there is exactly as you said, the need for coordination between academic and industrial partners. This is not new, but that's even more, I would say, necessary in the context of these pandemics. So briefly, what we have completely lacked has been coordination. You see, there is a political question on the attitude of China in these pandemics. That's one thing. But even beyond this, the role of WHO, which should be at the heart of the coordination, the way each country has generated its own policy and strategy and so on, and the way politics has been too much, I would say, away from science and some facts, at least in some countries, has been really at the heart of our difficulties. So I know that it seems, you see, everybody is claiming that science should be more present and so on, but this is true, you see, and you need obviously the government, and we discussed this previously, you need obviously the national institution, NIH, INSERM, and so on, and that's excellent. But you need new modes of organization where you really very swiftly bring together, you see. And for example, the Global Virus Network, what it is, this is very simple, but you just bring together people who can discuss. There is no issue on the intellectual property or asking the permission to this institution or that institution, and we need this to react swiftly. Now, having said that, we need also to coordinate with industrial partners. This is where, for example, networks such as the CEPI has been very interesting. The problem is that CEPI immediately became a little bit, if I may say, bureaucratic. You see, immediately as you grow, and this is human nature, you generate some bureaucracy. So what I mean is that for the next pandemics, we really need a very strong WHO And that's really what the governments have to accept, which is not easy beyond the good work and the goodwill, but this is key. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We have an organization, but we have to make it powerful, but we also have to make it reacting much more swiftly, as well as the government. So we need to have this other level of organization between individuals, science-driven, independent, but also absolutely connected to industrial partners. I'm not claiming that GVN is doing all very good and so on. That's not what I'm telling. But we have created now a corporate partnership center where really the industrial partners are really part of the network activity. There are other models. For example, there is a very interesting COVID moonshot for drug discovery. And there is a very interesting paper in Nature today describing their accomplishment for drug discovery. So we need this new organization on top of a coordination of governments.
So do you think that's going to happen and you know, what's your predicted timeline? And do you think we now are better equipped, you know, to respond to like another coronavirus pandemic or flu pandemic or some new virus, you know, because of all those gaps that have been identified quite clearly over the past year and a half?
Yeah, I really, you see, I'm optimistic. I'm an optimistic guy, but I really believe so. I believe that there has been, I mean, a number of lessons have been taken. Now, what I do not see yet is really the will to reinforce WHO. Obviously, the fact that the US came back to the WHO is very important, but that should also come with a reorganization of WHO, which actually started after the Ebola crisis. We must recognize this. But yes, I believe that overall, we better understand that actually we have in hands all the tools which are necessary. So it's not, the point is not to reinvent things. It's not to invent new agencies, a new mechanism. We have them. It's really a will. And I mean, this pandemic has been such a disaster that, yeah, I believe that lessons will be taken.
Yeah, as long as every country is really looking forward, you know, looking to support the rest of the world. I think that's one of the things we saw early on, you know, very focused on like their own country and, you know, the whether it was ventilators or N95 masks, you know, getting like a much more global approach, I think is one of the things that's been clearly lacking. And we can certainly hope that, you know, the WHO as well as other international institution will be like the bedrock of like, you know, the new collaboration between a country and, you know, for the next time around. Because I think if I may say it, and let me know, you know, that's what you meant earlier, but I think it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, right? The next pandemic. I mean, we've been going through cycle over the course of history, obviously, and we just don't know when that's going to happen and what type of virus. But I think that the network of virus center is really important, actually, to really go to every corner of the world and be on the forefront and really analyze what could become, you know, a pandemic, and hopefully next time around limited before it becomes this major global disease. So it's now 12:40. Maybe we can wrap up. I don't know if you want to say a final few words to that part of the discussion today, and then we can open up to questions from the audience. So hopefully you guys have been asking through the chat.
Okay, it says that we can take 5-7 minutes extra for the discussion. Oh no. So there is a question on the chat. Hello, I was wondering if you thought there should be any concerns for the number of people that I couldn't see the end of the question.
I can read it for, yeah, I can read it for you. So Mohammed is asking, is wondering if you thought there should be any concerns for the number of people that refuse to be vaccinated, which sometimes may seem overwhelming, especially on the internet. He's also curious to hear your opinion on it and whether it is even as problematic as it seems or not.
Yeah, I'm glad that this question has been raised. With Valerie, we could not discuss all the points. And this is a very important point. And this is very timely. We are reaching a plateau in the US, in Europe. I was on a French TV channel one day ago and we were exactly discussing this. We need to really analyze what's going on. It's not only hesitancy to vaccine, it's a combination of hesitancy and lack of access. You see, we have done the easiest part. It's strange, but we have done the easiest part of the job. Now we need to reach to many people who are in non-urban, in rural areas, you see, for example. We need to reach out to people who for social reasons, are more difficult to reach out to. So we have a lot of work to do on a number of people who are not hesitant. And then, exactly as you said, we have hesitancy. We will always be hesitant. You see, I can see in Florida, some conversations are just crazy on vaccines. I'm speaking very openly. I respect those people. I mean, everybody has the right to think what they want to think. But in Florida, you have 51% of vaccinated. That's not enough. That's not enough. And you know that in the US, you are around 70% in the north, but it goes to 40%, for example, in Mississippi or in these countries. So yes, I'm very concerned. They represent maybe 10 to 20% of the populations. So how to convince them, I don't know. But what I know is that if we vaccinate all those who want to be vaccinated and where we have difficulties to reach out to, if we go for vaccination, and this is an excellent move for the young people, I'm not speaking below 12, but above 12, and they want to be vaccinated. They want to be vaccinated because they want to travel and they want to get a job. So I believe that we will be able to do it, even with the hesitancy, but it's a serious question.
A question which is related to what you just said, a question from Michael about should we prioritize the children in one country to reach herd immunity and reopen the economy? For example, one country or a region at a time, or give the doses to populations most at risk in other countries with lower vaccination rates?
Well, that's again a very good and very tough question. In an ideal world, we would not have to discuss this, but in a world where we want to have mass vaccination and at the same time, as we were discussing with Valerie, to go to low-income countries, how are we going to do that? I don't think that you can prioritize one country, you see, and then go to the other one, because in theory it might work, but it would be very counterproductive and generate a number of national, you see, resentments. And so you need to have a worldwide policy. This is why I believe that the positioning of the GVN is that we do not support the idea to go for vaccination of children below 12 now. We will vaccinate children below 12, but we can wait. And we need, exactly as it has been said, to use as much as possible the doses for those people who are above 12 and obviously the old people and fragile. And when you look at the number of doses which are available in the so-called developed countries, this is feasible. This is now feasible with the rate of doses which is being produced. The point is, again, at the same time, to be able to send to the low-income countries the 1 billion, 2 billion to start with, but this is feasible. And we have to have them develop their local production capacities, and we have to train them. but it's a major challenge ahead for the whole next year.
And if I may, I can add another question related to vaccination. We've talked a lot about vaccination already, but you mentioned, with the vaccine we have in the developed world that could be, pivoted and exported to reach that threshold. I mean, there is also obviously some ethical consideration we haven't seen yet. Like there was an article, I think it was just last week, mentioning that a lot of the vaccine in the US, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine specifically, the expiration date is the end of June. They won't be used in the US, so are they really, do we have enough scientific evidence to push this expiration date, which, seems to be the absolute ethical thing to do if we have that data. And obviously, should those, country, US, Europe, sit on those doses of vaccine for, when people would decide to finally get vaccinated, of those I won't get my vaccine now, I have time. Folks, that mindset versus, sending it abroad and really reach people as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I believe that I absolutely believe that we should send out these doses because they can be used. You see, countries of low income, as you know, they are using now the Chinese vaccines, which are fairly good, but not so good. There is also the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik, which is, by the way, very good, but they have some production issues and quality control issues, you see. So having the Johnson & Johnson, it's not, to be very clear, it's not sending to the low-income countries what we do not want to use because we think that it is less effective. That would be absolutely unacceptable. But this is not the point. These are excellent vaccines, both the Johnson & Johnson, the AstraZeneca, and so on. And obviously, we should also send out the RNA-based vaccine. But the logistic is very different, you see.
Yeah, we have a lot more logistical issue with vaccine that are sold obviously at minus 70 degrees centigrade than something that could be in the fridge.
Although they are smoothing the condition, but it's still a work in progress.
And there is also the 1 dose versus 2 dose. I mean, there is something fantastic about getting 1 dose and getting, a very strong immunity, and both in logistical and timing of effect of the vaccine. Once you reach that threshold of 70% of people will receive the single shot they need.
Exactly.
That would be amazing, certainly.
We still have a few questions. The next one is, how do you interpret the same outcome for COVID infection and death in different countries where the vaccination rate is very different?
Well, a number of very interesting questions. Well, it reflects the fact that, as I said, and I really want to take this opportunity to emphasize, vaccines are only part of the solutions. And the reason for these discrepancies is that you are mixing very different public health systems, very different ways to handle the patients, with exactly different vaccine rates, different climates. For example, take what has happened in India. This has been horrible, horrible. I mean, that was a shortage of oxygen, and there is no despise in what I'm telling. I mean, I have been working with India a lot. This is a great country, and I really mean that. So nothing, but the truth is that with the same rate of vaccination and in different countries, you can have very different outcomes. So I believe that the explanation is this one. I mean, and also the climate, for example, Florida in the US is an extremely interesting case. The containment has stopped in August 2020. You see, in Florida, we have not been living on the same planet when I go to France than I went to France until recently. When you look at the number of deaths in Florida and you compare to the rate of infections, well, we have to be honest, it compares well with other states in the US and other countries. So we have to be very humble. And what I believe is that it's only in 2 years that we will have comprehensive, well-documented epidemiological studies, including the multi-parameters, which will really tell us what has been the good strategy and why exactly for this question, with different rates of vaccination, some countries came to the same result. Sweden is a proof of concept of this. I mean, they started well saying, okay, we are not doing as you are doing. I mean, we do not have a full containment. We are doing well and so on. Then it was a drama. They had a huge number of deaths in the nursing homes. They came back with a low rate of infection. Then they had another wave. We have to be very humble. When you have a viral pandemic, the truth is that so far, I hope it will change, but so far, we just don't know why viral pandemics stopped. That's the truth. So obviously, in this case, the huge vaccination will be a major factor. And by the way, in the US, it's very interesting that I was reading a paper on the comparison between different states in the US, and you can see the correlation in the US between states where you have a high rate of vaccination and states where you have a low rate of vaccination. So obviously, we are successful, but we have to recognize that many parameters are still not understood. This is where nutrition, environment, healthcare systems are obviously at stake. And maybe we can take on another question. I would like to say a few words about treatments, obviously, because that's...
In fact, Professor, the next question is about treatments.
Okay.
Another question, one of the concerns I hear a lot from practitioners is that there hasn't been much emphasis on treatment research for the virus, but I'm now hearing the opposite today. Could you elaborate on that as well?
Well, it's true. I mean, again, we didn't see on the treatments the same huge effort that has been paid to vaccines. That's absolutely true. Also, the idea was we have to go very fast. So we want to base this on repurposing of old drugs that we want to use for COVID-19, you see. And yes, we are going to work on new drugs, but it will take years. So that's all very good for the next pandemics, but let's work on existing drugs, which was logical, I mean, at the beginning. The results have been very disappointing. Hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. Ivermectin, it's still debated, but if it works, it's just at a very low, with a low efficacy. Nitazoxanide has come, but I must disclose that I'm an advisor of the company Romark, but nitazoxanide, it may be interesting. And a few others. But overall, the results have been disappointing. And at the same time, fortunately, some companies really worked on the new drugs. And also the network I was referring to on the COVID moonshot has generated very interesting results. So now we have, so for a while, we just had steroids and anticoagulants, which was very good for the patient, but nothing really new. Now we have monoclonal antibodies. It is clear that they are effective if they are injected very early during the very first few days of the infection. The problem is they are still administered by IV injection and they are very costly. But this is a real progress. Remdesivir, this is a very sensitive question, and I apologize if I do not please some people on this, but remdesivir doesn't work or work with a very low efficacy. That's the truth. But now we have direct antivirals which are coming. Pfizer, Merck, others. So there is a real hope that we will have direct antivirals. And I guess they will be really being used from maybe the spring or the summer 2022, and they may become also game changers.
So maybe the very last question, as I see it's already 12:56, could you talk on the future of virology and how much progress has been done through this pandemic to prevent and overcome the future challenges that the world may be facing, hopefully in a long time from now?
Well, I believe that first, you see, I have been the head of research institutions, and I have been in networks of heads of research institutions, including the NIH, the MRC, and so on. Virology over the past 25 years has been, in a way, neglected. And we know why, because people were thinking that only non-communicable disease became important. And obviously, non-communicable diseases are very important. But now COVID-19 has just further emphasized this. Viruses are there. So we had a shortage of scientists. We have a shortage of laboratory technicians on diagnostics and so on. So the future of virology, I believe that is that because of this crisis, and this is very positive, we are going to have a strong stimulus as to the recruitment, the training, the education. We are working a lot on this, on the GVN. And that's really the thing. I believe that the future of virology to be integrated with a new science. It's combining those virologists who are able to culture a virus, because you need to keep these skills, you see, but combine to obviously what is about the big data, what is about AI, about chemistry. It's really a new generation of virologists. And it's also the integration of virology in medicine and public health. So I believe that we are going, but we are already, but we are going to witness a very new development. And if I may, I just want to take this question to, because I forgot a point which I believe is important. In all this research on COVID-19, as always in science, serendipity is very important. And I will give two examples of serendipity. For example, the non-specific vaccines working on innate immunity, the fact that vaccination against with oral poliovirus, with BCG can protect people against COVID-19. This is something which is being explored and also within the GVN. And this is something which can be very helpful, not instead of specific vaccines, but associated to specific vaccines and to provide a bridge. And along the same path regarding drug development, it's very interesting to see that even beyond drug repurposing, for example, the work on the nicotinic acid receptor, the work on antihistaminic receptor, science in virology must always allow strange people, unexpected findings to emerge. And that's really what we need. And we need to nurture these people who are different from the others, because that's the way we are making the great discoveries which can solve such pandemics. That's my pledge.
Thank you. C'est le mot de la fin. Sure. So you want to close up? Yeah.
So I just want to say a huge thank you for your support and participation in this webinar series. Especially to you, Valerie and Christian, for speaking today and taking the time to be part of this fireside chat. Now, as a closing note, we do have some upcoming events on both Chamber of Commerce. So first, there's the FACC New England. So FACC New England will be hosting the 6th and last episode of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in honor of Pride Month, because it is this month. And so this will be held on June 29th. And on October 6th, there will be Life Science Panorama. You can, of course, find more information about all those events on the FACC New England website, faccne.org. And on the FRAMCO side, we have coming up June 23rd, a webinar. It's in French. It's how to become successful in, and it will touch different subjects and industries. The first one being about the boulangeries. And our next in-person events will be Bastille Day, the 14th of July, that we're organizing with the French Army in Tampa. You can, of course, find more information of those on our website, framco.org. Thank you very much.